Capitalism and Schizophrenia, a 2-volume work by Gilles, Deleuze and Felix Guattari. Volume 1, L'Anti-Oedipus. Volume 2, Mille Plateau. One way to approach this, by way of introduction, would be to look at it as a play of forces. Most famous terms are the tree model and the Rhizome model, the idea of a central organization, a central administration, a central authority, along with the despotic signifier trying to pin things down, trying to tell it the way it is, trying to control and dominate. And then the force of wanting to spread out, experiment, explore, go further, to push the boundaries, to go beyond the boundaries, like a multiplicity. There's not one central power, but there's a whole network spreading out of infinite connections, infinite hyperlinks. That's the Rhizome model.
The idea of a container and the contents. The capitalism is like the money container of the current world. And then the schizophrenia is like the passion simmering inside, the experimentation, the desire to go further. The capitalism is like a structure. There's like a structure of walls signifying reality the way it's supposed to be, trying to contain things, to keep things predictable, to keep things the same. But human nature is constantly evolving and exploring. Right away you notice the title, Capitalism and Schizophrenia. Forget the content for a moment and just notice that it's a binary title, or it appears to be binary title. Capitalism and Schizophrenia. So capitalism and schizophrenia, you could look at it as form and expression, form and passion. There's two models. The most famous aspect of Deleuze is the Rhizome model as opposed to the Arborescent model. The nature of the tree with a stick that'll clobber you if you're a bad boy or a bad girl. And the idea of rhizomes of grass that spread out in infinite multiplicity. Two aspects of human existence. Flux, meaning things in a flow, the flow of time. There are things in the state of happening. Things are happening. There's a vital spirit in us that Deleuze liked to refer to in his book on Bergson, Élan vital, a vital spirit. The spirit, when you're born, you're off on a trajectory from birth to death. There's a kind of inspiration, a force, a desire. We're desiring machines. Desire is kind of in the sense of Spinoza's ethics as a joyful passion, a sense of fullness and overflowing, contrasted with the desire related to lack, related to debt, which he talks about in Nietzsche's commentary on Nietzsche's genealogy of morals, that punishment is like a form of repaying a debt. Jesus died to pay for your sins. So in fact you're born in a state of original sin that you owe. The moment you're born, you are in a state of debt and own. And that creates a sense of shame, of inadequacy, that something's missing, that you need something. It creates a craving for what you don't have. Desire based on the sense of lack. I am lacking something. I need something. And that's the ressentiment, resentment, bitterness, frustration, attitude, the sad passions, as Spinoza would call it, as opposed to the joyous passion, which is a sense of overflowing and joy, which is one's natural state, which is to create, to have fun, to be joyful. And yet, in the system of resentment and bitterness and sin and debt, you're supposed to feel bad, and you're viewed with suspicion if you're smiling and enjoying the afternoon. How can you just sit there when there's so much to be done? Make yourself useful. That's based on on a sense of debt and shame that you have to make yourself useful. A joyful passion, a sense of fullness, of wanting to experiment and enjoy, as opposed to being trapped in a world, a bubble of interpretation or belief or mandates or codes, that everything is codified and regulated and you must behave accordingly. Well, of course there are common sense codes like traffic regulations to help you move about safely without getting hurt, and there are rules of language to help you make your meaning clear. If there was no structural language, it would just be and no one would know what anyone was talking about. So that's why it's a play of forces. You need structure. For example, in language, you need structure in order to be able to communicate. And you need structure, traffic regulations to reduce accidents and make things safe. But if you go too extreme with your rules, it can block the creative path. So for example, in literature, there's experimental literature. Like the famous example is James Joyce Finnegan's Wake, where he pushes the English language to the point of wordplay, incorporating a lot of other languages. It's and yet it's still readable and understandable, but you have to tune into a different way of reading, a different way of looking at things. So, or you use common sense. I mean, you stop when the light is red, but if it's midnight and you're on a deserted crossroads and there's a psycho killer coming towards you with an assault rifle pointed at you, and he's coming at you on foot, personally I would step on the gas and go through that red light, even though it's against the law to go through a red light. But if going through that red light would save me from getting shot by a psycho killer with an assault rifle, I would definitely do that, because my life is more valuable than obeying the law in this case. So that's what I mean by a play of forces. Structure and passion. That structure is there to help things function and move, but it should not be an obstacle. It shouldn't be claustrophobic, like ironclad, rigid, totalitarian, authoritarian. There's a certain amount of freedom, a certain amount of leeway, a certain amount of extenuating circumstances, a multiplicity of factors. This is it. One day. And the point of this is to reflect on yourself and where you're coming from, reflect on the nature of your subjectivity, and don't be so sure of your opinions. Just because you think something is nonsense doesn't mean it's nonsense, or just because you have your doubts about something doesn't mean it's no good. Stayed stuck within the status quo, we might still be living in caves. So there's constant challenges to the models of the day. A dramatic example in the Middle Ages, the challenge to the notion that the Earth was the center of the universe, and the powers tried to stifle the discovery that the Earth rotates around the sun. So that's an example of the conflict between the despotic signifier telling you the way reality is, and the desire to go further, to keep exploring. That reality can't be contained in one central administrative body. That reality spreads out in a multiplicity of situations and places. Life, death, arborescent, central administration, authority, punishment, the despot, the despotic signifier, which offers the official interpretation of reality, as opposed to the desire to experiment and go further, to deterritorialize lines of light, or the idea of segments, or like a huge net of structure thrown over the reality. Someone throws a net, but in the mesh, between the meshes of the net is the things pass through molecules. So there's the molar structure of the containing grid, but then there's the molecular particles escaping through the holes in the grid, which is like schizophrenia, sort of breaking through of constraint and going out in infinitely. If it goes too far, it can lead to insanity or death or addiction or